Hi, I'm Michael Massey, the FIA Formula One Race Director and Safety Delegate, and you have the pleasure to be listening to Beyond the Grid.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Beyond the Grid with me, Tom Clarkson. Well, what a season opener we had in Austria at the weekend. Breathless racing, reliability issues, the extent to which we haven't seen in years, and some overtaking controversy. It was F1 at its brilliant best. As a spectator, it was hard to keep track of what was going on. So just imagine for a second if it was your job to know everything that was happening on track and in the pit lane. From Romain Grosjean exceeding track limits to Lewis Hamilton and Alex Albon colliding in the closing stages, or even Sergio Perez speeding in the pit lane, it would be a mind-bogglingly complex task. And that's where my guest this week comes in. Michael Massey is the Formula One race director and safety delegate. He's the most senior FIA official attending every race, which makes his office in race control the place where the buck stops. He's still relatively new to the job, having taken the reins at the start of 2019, following the tragic death of his predecessor and mentor, Charlie Whiting, on the eve of last year's Australian Grand Prix. Overnight, in what was only his 10th race working for the FIA, Michael stepped into the breach and he rose to the challenge magnificently. Remarkably, given the responsibility resting on his shoulders, Michael is only 41 years old. That makes him just a few months older than Kimi Räikkönen. Yet at races, Kimi has to dance to his tune. But Michael wouldn't be intimidated by anyone in the Formula One paddock. He might be young, but he's put the hard yards in to get where he is today. Back home in Australia, he had senior roles in super touring and supercars. And he was even the CEO of Rally Australia. And his first touchpoints with Formula One were in Singapore and Korea. Remember that? Where he was heavily involved in delivering the inaugural Grand Prix for those countries in 2008 and 2010. So hopefully you're starting to build a picture of Michael in your head. Well, let's now hand the canvas to him to complete the picture. From running races to running drivers' briefings, Michael has one of the most interesting roles in Formula One, and he discusses it all. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, Michael, it's great to see you via Zoom. We're both here in Austria, but we're having to talk via computer because we're in different hotels. But great to see you all the same.
No, likewise, Tom. It's great to see you too. I think I've only seen you via Zoom since about early February.
Yeah. Now, look, mate, I feel it's a real privilege to grab you. We're speaking the day after the season opening Austrian Grand Prix. What has today held for the FIA's race director?
The Monday after a race meeting's been compiling effectively some reports from the weekend. Because of the unique situation that we're in, having back-to-back races at the same venue, meetings about fixing things for next weekend, debriefs on what can be improved, looking forward to planning Silverstone with the team at Silverstone and Motorsport UK and the various British authorities, just other little planning meetings along the way. So it's sort of not far different to what lockdown was really in Australia, other than the fact that I'm sitting in Austria rather than where I was previously.
Michael, is it an interesting exercise for you to be going back to the same racetrack next weekend?
It is. It's a unique exercise because there were little bits and pieces that we learned from last weekend, and coming out into pit lane and just to go around the circuit and have a look at a couple of things last night, it's like, well, we can actually fix or change this for next weekend to improve it, which is a unique situation that hasn't really arisen before. So yeah, it's strange, but it's also helpful in another way.
Now, a lot of guys and girls listening to this will be going, that was an awesome Grand Prix yesterday. It must have been pretty busy in race control. How much did you enjoy it? Did you have time to enjoy it?
No. Simply put, because you're so within race control and, doing my role as the race director, you're so focused on getting the job done, looking at all the cars, deployment of safety cars, making sure all of the marshals are safe and so forth. And so that's our primary focus in race control. And, you look at really the last 50% of the race, give or take, was super intense with all of that happening. And the only reason why I knew it was a great television spectacle was my mother sent me a text message saying that was amazing to watch on television. So, yeah, but so I'll probably sit down and actually watch it tomorrow night and watch a replay of it.
Is every race like that for you in race control, or are there quieter ones?
There have been, it's sort of up and down, you can't really predict, but there are quieter ones that you get the chance to sort of follow the race a lot more, let's call it, because you don't have, be it mechanical breakdowns or safety cars or virtual safety cars, and everything just sort of runs seamlessly from beginning to end. And you can spend more time having a look at sector times and gaps and seeing who's doing who and sort of following pit strategies a bit better. So, yeah, there are, but then there's the other ones, and, use yesterday as an example, or Hockenheim last year, where literally from start to finish, you're struggling to take a breath.
Have any of the teams spoken to you about the reliability stuff that was going on yesterday? We had 11 finishes on the lead lap or something?
Yeah, something like that. And it was really, myself and Ross had a quick discussion about it last night and spoken to a couple of the sporting directors late yesterday afternoon as I was going to get my COVID test, funnily enough. And I think it was a huge level of surprise, particularly considering the reliability that we saw in Barcelona. To effectively go over the 2 weeks of testing and have very, very minimal issues, to then come here and see the reliability issues that we had was a huge surprise for those of us in race control, and I think for the teams as well.
Why is it? Is it something to do with the curbs here?
No, not at all. I think there was just a variety of factors, and speaking to some of them, it was issues that they've never seen before. Obviously, I heard this and reading a little bit of the press reports about Mercedes instructed their drivers to stay off the curbs, but some of them were engine issues, some of them were electronics issues. Obviously, we had Kimi losing a wheel, so I think it was a combination of everything, but it was a level of unreliability that we haven't seen really in a very long time. A bit of a surprise for all of us.
Yeah, and it threw up a great result, actually, didn't it, in terms of, getting Lando Norris on the podium and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think, for me, it was to see it close, seeing, the way Lando came through, seeing Sergio racing up there, obviously with Max early on, Alex in the mix. There was, Charles coming from where he did to where he finished. I think overall from the little bits and pieces of when you actually saw the results at the end and the way it all panned out, I would hope that it was a fantastic spectacle for those viewing on television around the world.
Now, look, you mentioned the COVID test there. How much extra work has there been in the build-up to Austria because of the COVID crisis?
It's an astronomical amount of work is probably the best way to put it. We've been having daily return to motorsport meetings at the FIA for the past 10 weeks and putting together the return to motorsport guidelines that cover all forms of the sport. We've introduced a new appendix to the FIA International Sporting Code to cover COVID-related events for F1, 2, 3 and Super Cup, so the broader F1 events, and just all of the planning, testing regimes, working with our partners at Formula One, working with, we've been having pretty much weekly meetings with the Formula One sporting directors on trying to make sure that we've covered every single base. So there's been a core group of people have put in a mammoth amount of hours into the planning, just internally, let alone what the teams have had to do to change their processes, procedures, and everything to adopt to the new environment under a COVID situation.
And how much satisfaction do you take from, 10,000 tests, I think, over the weekend were carried out, and every one of them came back negative?
Yeah, so over the weekend itself, so let's call it from everyone arriving to the end of yesterday, I think we've had the vicinity of about 5,000 tests on event, probably a similar number pre-event, so before everyone got to Austria for various testing regimes, but particularly on event, having had no positive tests at all is a huge satisfaction. I think vindicates in a way that, we will have our critics that we've gone too hard with regards to the processes and procedures that we've put in place. We will have those that probably say that we haven't gone far enough. from an FIA perspective, trying to balance all of the risk, using the various independent experts and guidance that we've received from a vast variety of people, I think we've achieved the right balance. And the outcome that we got over the weekend, there was sort of a level of relief yesterday morning when we sort of got our group message saying that there's no positive results again for Sunday. But then getting to the end of yesterday, it was a huge relief for everyone. And, congratulations to everyone involved on the amount of work that was put in to get to this point.
But also, wasn't it a sort of touch of reality I felt when, everyone was talking about COVID, and then suddenly we get to the race weekend itself and suddenly the teams are squabbling and Red Bull are protesting Mercedes over the DAS system, and it's like, Formula One's back,
As soon as we got an inkling that the protest was going to occur, and said to my colleagues, to Colin Hayward, who was sitting next to me in race control, I said, "We're back. Don't worry about COVID or anything else. We are back."
But Michael, actually, on a serious note there, did you come to Austria expecting that protest, or do you get given the heads up on something like that?
No, there was sort of, pre-Melbourne, there was obviously discussions happening that may or may not occur. But as well as anyone, Tom, that paddock whispers are very loud and clear in a whole lot of areas. So until it actually happens, you don't know. But no, we were advised on Friday, not long before that it went through, that there was going to be a protest lodged on Friday regarding the DAS. So, and the stewards, as everyone saw, had a very long night, and even introducing Zoom elements into a steward's hearing because of restrictions on staff and so forth, and they made their decision.
So DAS is okay for this season, but it's obviously not there for 21. Just on a personal level, Michael, what is your attitude towards technical innovation? I mean, do you welcome it, or do you think we need to rein in as much as possible, and that's the way to get closer racing?
It's a double-edged sword, to be quite honest. I think technical innovation is amazing. We've seen so many different things over the course of time, be it from a six-wheel Tyrrell to a fan Brabham, the F-duct, the double diffuser, which we still have a giggle with Ross about going occasionally. So that's part of what F1's teams are there to do. That's their role, is to pick it apart as best as they can. Does it necessarily promote closer racing? Probably not, but I still think there's enough freedom, particularly in the way the 22 regulations have been done. Yes, they're a lot more restricted, but there's a level of freedom there for teams to still show their ingenuity and innovation. It's a balance, to be quite honest, Tom. It's not an easy one way or the other. It's a fine balance, but I'm quite hopeful and, confident that the balance, the FIA and, working with F1 and with the support of the teams, have found the right balance for the new regulations.
And to keep on top of what the teams are doing, how useful was it for someone like Charlie Whiting, your predecessor, to be the poacher turned gamekeeper, to sort of understand the tricks? And yes, you have a history in racing that we're going to get onto, but in Formula One, you haven't jumped that fence. And do you feel exposed because of that in any way?
No, I think, and going back, looking to where, Charlie came from his Brabham days, and from that side of it of being effectively a mechanic and so forth, and working within the team, but then going from there and into the FIA technical delegate role initially, then moving into the race director role, he had that broad sense of the paddock, knowing everyone, the current crop of sporting directors, let's call it, or technical directors, all started off as very junior people when Charlie first came into the role. So they sort of grew with him. But one of the parts, and I remember speaking in detail with him about this in 2018 when we were working together, is that the level of complexity of the modern day Formula One car needed specialists in different areas. So he had already started having a specialist electronics department within the FIA, more specific technical experts in different areas, because just like a team structured to have so many different experts in different areas, the FIA had to react in a similar way. So, and plus my role is probably a little bit different now in that, Nicholas Tombasis, my colleague, is head of all technical items. I look after the sort of sporting and operational areas together with my race director and safety delegate role. And then Federico Lotti, who not many people would have heard of, is the head of financial regulations at the FIA. So we've split it up very much into the three pillars for each of us to concentrate on our respective areas, but we all very much communicate between us to make sure that everything cross-pollinates as best as we can.
That's really interesting. So Charlie was already instigating that change.
Absolutely, very much so. And, moving on, because his role was so broad within it, but he had very much started instigating that change. And, even prior to myself and Scott Elkins fulfilling the deputy role to Charlie in 2018, Laurent Mekies from Ferrari was the deputy, and Marcin Budkowski from Renault was in the FIA technical department, sort of. So that was part of the succession planning that already started happening a number of years earlier.
Michael, can we talk a little bit about Charlie and the influence he had on your career?
I first worked really closely with Charlie setting up the inaugural Korean Grand Prix. So at the time, I was working for CAMS, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport, now Motorsport Australia, and got seconded to Korea for 6 months to help establish that first event, which was a mammoth task in its own right. But that was really the first time where we worked closely together. I arrived there, I think it was June 2010, and you'll remember, and a lot of fans of F1 will remember, that there was a lot of talk even then if the actual event was going to happen. So my focus went from trying to train Korean officials and organise that side of it to effectively becoming a pseudo project manager and conduit of information to Charlie and the FIA president, Jean Todt, at the time on progress. And, it was a huge part.
But Mike, how much contact did you have with Charlie back then?
Oh, a huge amount. We were sort of, through that period, I think we were having daily, if not more, emails, phone contact, the various inspections that he did. So that was really the first main interaction where we worked together. Then obviously every year in Australia thereafter came about, but probably the moment front and centre that came about was 2018 at the FIA Steward Seminar, which I think you were MC for, if I recall correctly.
And this shining star from Australia.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but no, I attended that as part of my role that I was doing within the supercars world, and started obviously knowing Herbie and Charlie, and sort of did what we did there. And then Herbie said that he was coming to Australia for the the World Superbike round a few weeks later at Phillip Island. So let's catch up for a bite to eat. And it was actually Herbie said, right, so what's your career aspirations? What do you want to do? And I said, well, ultimately, I'd like to work with CW, and when he chooses, be in the game to be his successor. And funny enough, Herbie being, for those of us that know Herbie very well, and being one of Charlie's best friends from a very long time, said, cool, let's make it happen.
But Mike, that's an extraordinary thing. So you were, working in supercars in Australia, and even when you were doing that, you foresaw where you are now today.
Yeah, my aspiration, even, from when I started working in supercars in that race control environment, and even going back to when I worked with super touring in Australia in the late 90s, all of us have our goals in life, and my career goal was to be the Formula One race director. The circumstances by how it came about were extremely sad and tragic, to lose a mentor and a friend. But it's probably that discussion with Herbie. And then I remember not long thereafter in 2018 when Laurent internally announced his resignation within the FIA, that I was sitting at a restaurant in Adelaide for the first round of the Supercars Championship, and sitting at dinner, and suddenly my phone rings and it's got Charlie Whiting. And I'm just thinking to myself, why is he calling me? He should be busy with Barcelona testing at the moment. So he said, this is what's happened. Obviously, it's not public knowledge as yet. Would it be of interest to you to work with us this year?
In what capacity?
As a deputy, his deputy. And it's like, well, yes, obviously is the answer. And at the time he said, okay, I've got, there's probably three of you that I'd like to sort of trial in an operational capacity at the events, which ultimately then came down to two of us. So after effectively the summer break in 2018, myself and Scott Elkins shared the role, Scott being the Formula E race director. And then for 2019, the plan was that I would be the permanent deputy for Formula 2 and Formula 3. And then for whatever it was, 8 or 9 events that clashed with F1, that I would fulfill the F1 race director, deputy race director role to Charlie. And then sadly, what occurred in Melbourne took us all completely by surprise.
I know it's a painful memory for all of us, but can I ask you a little bit about that weekend in terms of how much contact did you have with Charlie prior to the race in Melbourne?
A fair bit, obviously, in the lead up to and preparation. There was quite a bit, and out there on the Tuesday, and started sort of preparing bits and pieces. Wednesday out there, and then myself and Colin Hayward actually came back in the car with him on the Wednesday night back to the hotel. And yeah, it was like all good planning, just sort of standing out the front of the hotel because I was only staying at home down the road. And it's like, yep, we've got to do this and this tomorrow. All things going well. Let's go and have a bite to eat at the Japanese restaurant around the corner tomorrow night. So that was sort of all good, fine. And then obviously Thursday morning, what happened? He wasn't able to join us anymore. So yeah, it was a tough emotional weekend, particularly knowing what had happened very soon after getting to the circuit, but not being able to literally tell us all. The only person that I actually did speak to was my mother, because it was like, it was all a bit too much. It was a tough day. It was a tough weekend, but something that, on the other hand, that I couldn't be more proud of was the way that the entire FIA staff, the F1 community as a whole, with the support of the teams. I was very fortunate that we were in Australia, and it was a trackside officiating team that I knew extremely well, obviously with Tim Schenken as the clerk of the course, and the entire CAMS team and the Australian Grand Prix Corporation team, who I'd had a long relationship with. Without everyone, that weekend wouldn't have happened. And the way everyone stepped up and helped each other showed, take out the little niggling and all the rest of it that we see in the background and the gloves off fight on a racetrack. Behind the scenes, everyone was completely united as one to make sure that we could achieve what we did and got through it all.
And the teams were supportive?
The teams were amazing. The drivers were amazing. Everyone. The teams could not have been more helpful getting through, realistically, that weekend in Bahrain back to back. I think once we got to China, the filter started coming off a little bit, and by the time we got to Barcelona for the first of the European events, the boys sitting next to me said quite clearly, well, welcome to Formula One, because they've all forgotten about the nice part. But no, I honestly, Tom, could not have done it without everyone's help in different ways.
So Australia 2019 was what? How many Grand Prix had you worked at up until that moment?
In an FIA capacity, that was my 10th event.
I mean, that is extraordinary. Your 10th event, and suddenly you are the race director.
Yeah. And as an F1 event in an FIA capacity, it was my 10th event. So, I'd done some steward trainee elements and that before, but actually in a true operational capacity, it was 10th event.
Mike, what was the best piece of advice that Charlie ever gave you?
Best piece of advice Charlie gave me: listen lots, let everyone have their say. Don't feel pressured to make a decision on the spot outside of what you do. Yeah, probably just don't be afraid and back to your own instincts. Probably the sort of the core ones to it. And yeah, something that sort of resonates, backing your own instincts is where you have to go. And when you don't have, I've said this previously, when you don't have a point of reference to sort of bounce things off, you sort of need to sort of use the broader environment to get some historical information on where things have come from and why things have been done in certain ways, to then come to your own conclusion and make your own decisions moving forward.
Do you ever find yourself stopping and saying to yourself, what would Charlie have done right now?
Many times. many times. A lot more than probably what a lot of people think. But no, there's those moments you sort of reflect, be it on track inspections, be it analysing. I very much look at how I go about things and at an event in between and what you can do. And yeah, there are a lot of times that you sort of look up and say, come on, mate, can you give me some inspiration, please? Some guidance, be it a lightning bulb or something. But yeah.
What was Charlie's demeanour like in race control?
Relaxed. There were a couple of times that he lost it, but even in the heat of the moment, yeah, relaxed. And, even his demeanour over the radio, he only had to raise his voice sort of a couple of decibels with the team managers for them to realise, yep, I've made your point. There's no need for you to continue trying to reiterate that point. And it's like, yep, thank you. And sort of quite firm in the end. But he had time for everyone. That was unwavering across the board.
Can you just explain to people how busy you are between races? Because, we kind of get the race control bit, I guess, but are you constantly travelling between races as well?
In a normal year, yes. Obviously, we're doing circuit inspections for circuits that are currently on the calendar, prospective new events that may be on the horizon.
Give us an exclusive, mate.
No.
Come on. Have you been to, Mugello recently?
So no, there's going to be no exclusives on anything. Sorry, Tom. But no, looking at different sites and venues and seeing what's there, doing normal track inspections. There was a number of inspections at Zandvoort last year.
One thing that you are particularly linked with towards the end of last year anyway was the reintroduction of the black and white flag. The sort of let them race mantra.
You mean that amazing new flag that came out of nowhere that everyone had forgotten about? That
yeah, we had actually.
I think was yeah, I did. Absolutely. It was a reintroduction.
So when was it? It was last used in, Malaysia about 10 years ago, wasn't it?
I think there or thereabouts. That sounds about right, yeah.
What triggered that?
It was a flag that I was used to using in my previous race director life as a warning flag, which is effectively what it is. I think some countries call it the bad sportsmanship flag, others call it the warning flag, but effectively the meaning is the same. It's the rap on the knuckles of don't do it again. I did some, following, there was a couple of things that happened throughout the early part of last year. And I started asking around of why don't we use it?
What answer did you get when you asked that question?
I don't know.
Okay.
So there was no real, speaking to a number of current sporting directors, getting an understanding for them to ask some of the team principals at the time that had been around a little bit longer if they had an understanding as to why, asking my colleagues within the FIA, speaking to Herbie Blash about why, because obviously he had been around so long, asking Laurent Mekies, who obviously had done the role before, and just said, no one could give me effectively an answer as to why. And one of the main reasons for, I said to all of the teams when we were sitting in Hungary, that we would reintroduce it after the summer break as a warning, so it wasn't a surprise. And all it was is communicating in a different way. So those type of warnings had happened in the earlier part of the year and in the previous 9 years over the radio intercom. So Charlie would hop on the radio to whoever it was, at Ferrari or Mercedes or Red Bull, Racing Point, whoever it may have been, and said, I don't like what such and such has done, elbows in a little bit more type of scenario.
So a bit more of a public statement.
Exactly. Very much a public statement to say, we've seen it, we don't like it, that's your warning. don't do it again.
Mike, have the drivers taken liberties? Do they see it as, all right, we've got a joker now, we can keep doing that until Senor Race Director gives us the flag?
No, I think they respect it more because they all know. So, all of the other cars know that it's been shown and what it's been for, whereas the other one was the one-on-one communication. I think they've all, from my understanding, they respect the fact that there's a very fine line between the pleasure and pain, so to speak, to use as the saying goes. So I think they've appreciated it, as have the teams. I would think, from what I've understood, the viewing public in a similar way, because it's a clear, they all know now that, okay, well, it just hasn't been forgotten about or swept away. It actually has been seen and acknowledged.
What is the biggest misapprehension about your job? The biggest sort of misunderstanding, do you think?
That I'm the one that penalises everyone.
I thought you were going to say that, yeah.
No, and it's the biggest misapprehension with a lot of race director roles, to be quite honest, that everyone thinks that, and no different with Charlie before me, that everyone thought that the race director is the one that applies the penalties, which isn't the case. We have a separate independent, as you're well aware, and you've become a pseudo steward, having been to enough steward seminars recently, Tom, that there is quite a lot of training that happens, and we have an FIA, let's call it judiciary, which is the stewards of each event. And in recent years, their sort of capabilities been bolstered with the introduction of a driver steward, which a number of have been involved in. So that's probably the biggest misapprehension with the role itself. The display of the black and white flag sits with me as the race director, as does the deployment of a safety car, virtual safety car, stopping a session with a red flag or anything like that. When it comes to, I refer matters to the stewards, or the stewards can look at an incident of their own volition, but ultimately they are the ones who issue a penalty.
So what triggered you to start thinking about the black and white flag? Can I sort of point at a few instances? Had, for example, Canada 2019, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton.
That was one, certainly.
Sebastian Vettel goes wide and Lewis Hamilton thought there was a gap, but the wall and Sebastian Vettel moving to the right-hand side closed that gap down. Has Vettel just got away with an error and preserved his lead in this Canadian Grand Prix?
You just came on the track, so David.
Yeah, copy this, we're on it.
Sebastian Vettel has been given a 5-second time penalty.
We've got a 5-second time penalty for unsafe re-entry. Head down, head down. We have Hamilton 3 seconds behind.
I had nowhere to go. Seriously, I had nowhere to go. I didn't see him.
Copy that. Stay focused. 10 laps to go.
I am focused, but they're stealing the race from us.
Sebastian Vettel takes the checkered flag, but Lewis Hamilton wins the Canadian Grand Prix.
Might that have had a different result had you had the black and white flag in your armoury for that race?
I don't think so. It may have. I don't probably like to look back at things like that, to be honest, because it's the way things were, the interpretation of the way that, or sorry, not the interpretation, the manner in which the regulations were applied, understanding of the drivers and so forth, even discussing it at a drivers' meeting with all of them. It wasn't a clear consensus if it should or shouldn't have been a penalty or what couldn't have happened. And one of the parts that probably a lot of people aren't aware of is that to help me in my role, as well as helping the FIA and F1 in understanding what, there was this principle, these 3 words that were running around a lot called let them race. But as the new boy on the block, no one could actually tell me what let them race actually meant. So I went through a process of getting a whole lot of incidents together last year, and with zero warning, got the drivers after a drivers meeting and said, okay, play through the incidents. You tell me what you think the penalty should have been or no penalty, without anonymously. So didn't ask them to put their names on it, anything, literally filled out a spreadsheet, same element with the team principals and same part with the sporting directors.
Oh, fascinating. What results did you get in?
Funnily enough, the mixed view, probably just like, the spectators and the viewing public, that there was a mixed view on a whole lot of things. But generally, those that were seen as an infringement previously and a breach of the regulations all of them agreed that they were a breach of the regulations. Oh, sorry, not all. The vast majority agreed that it was a breach. There might have been minor variations in what the penalty was, be it 5 seconds or 10 seconds. We have some of the more, I'll call it, old school views, whereas like, no, drive-through is all it is, which you look back a few years.
Just out of interest, is there an age thing there? So the older drivers who have been around a bit longer will think perhaps a little bit more differently to the young guys?
Yeah, I think that is a case, but also not just the drivers, team principals, sporting directors as a whole. And some have seen the evolution. So, you go back, or whatever it was, 4 or 5 years, maybe even a little bit longer. The only penalty was a drive-through or a stop-and-go penalty. Now we've had, as the sports evolved globally, we've got the 5-second penalty, the 10-second penalty, and all of that. So the core regulations themselves regarding driving haven't actually changed. It's just the manner in which they're applied has sort of varied along the way, working with everyone.
Now, you mentioned the driver's briefing there. Do you enjoy the interaction with the drivers?
Oh, it's at times it's quite entertaining, to be quite honest. I remember sort of going through, I think it was my first 4 or 5 drivers meetings last year, and getting to the end of the briefing and saying, okay, is there any questions? And like just literal silence. And I sort of started questioning, okay, am I doing something wrong? Are they scared or whatever it may be? But obviously it's one, as I said, earlier about the relationship side of it. Like with anyone, a lot of the drivers, the only person that they ever saw as the F1 race director from when they were karting was Charlie Whiting. So it was a very different person, and sort of developing that level of confidence and being able to, interact, work together, is something that's built up over time. It's not an overnight solution.
Do you think it's because they see you as the headmaster and they don't want to say anything that might upset you, or I don't know?
No, to be honest, as that sort of rapport has developed and that relationship developed over the course of last year, and even moving on to here, I get a sense that they're certainly much more comfortable to ask questions, come up to, as last year went on, obviously it's a bit more difficult in the current environment to have one-on-one discussions with them other than like this. But, it's just sort of that rapport of being able to have the faith to come up and ask questions. Why did this happen like this? Or what could I have done better? So, that's the relationship building, and something that you just can't force. It's either there or it's not. And I think their level of knowing me and how I operate has got better, and me knowing how they operate, both as individuals and as a group, has got better. There only comes with time. There's nothing more that you can do with that.
Does it get tense?
It can do, has done.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. It can get tense, but at the end of the day, I'm more than happy to hear various people's views, but it's ultimately, in an operational end of where we go and direction-wise, the buck stops with me, so to speak, as they would say.
And you are the touch point. So to use yesterday's race as an example, Lewis Hamilton gets a 5-second penalty for that incident with Alex Albon, but you're probably the one who has to pick up the pieces from that with the drivers.
100%. That's exactly right. So, I asked the stewards to look at it because it was at a point in the race that there was a lot going on. But yes, I am the touch point with the teams. I'm the touch point with the drivers. There's always 2 sides to any story. You will get both different perspectives. To their credit, in the vast majority of cases, from what I've seen, I won't say all, but the vast majority, a lot of them put their hand up and say, yep, I was the one at fault.
Do you expect to have to pick up the pieces and have a conversation with Alex and Lewis this coming Friday after the driver's briefing?
I don't know. There's more than anything. There's questions that are asked more as clarifications on how things look or the way things are interpreted. But if there's some of them that are seen, incidents that are seen as relatively simplistic, you don't really get that many questions on it. It's more the ones that sort of, let's call it an each way bet or a 50-50 occasion, that are the ones that encourage discussion. And, that was a lot of the reverse part of it last year of me asking, probably jumping ahead of it and asking them for their feedback, because, for me, there was some situations that were completely new. So getting their understanding and mindset is a big part of it, because you can quite easily run off on a tangent without having the support of the group, be it drivers, be it teams, all the way through. So it's a two-way street, like any form of communication.
We'll have more insights from Michael in just a moment. But first this. If, like many of us in this day and age, you find those personal goals you've been setting yourself slip down an ever-growing to-do list, there's a special offer I'd like to tell you about that might just help you tick something off that list. And it will be of particular interest to those of you who are keen to learn a new language, or perhaps brush up on your already existing linguistic skills, but feel like you just don't have the time to attend more formal lessons. Babbel is designed to get you speaking a new language within weeks with daily 10 to 15 minute lessons. It's available as an app or online, so no matter where or when you log onto a lesson, your progress will be synced across all devices as you learn at your own pace, and most importantly, on your own schedule. There are 14 different languages to choose from, including French, Spanish, Italian, and German. And my goodness, I wish I could sprechen Sie Deutsch while spending 2 weeks in German-speaking Austria for the season-opening double-header. And what's really great about Babbel is that the lessons are created by more than 100 language experts, real people putting their experience into practice for you in a funny and educational way, which really adds a welcome personal touch. You learn through interactive dialogue that mirrors what you might encounter out in the real world, so you can feel confident showing off your new skill. Right now, Babbel is offering our listeners 6 months free with a purchase of a 6-month subscription with promo code GRID. Go to babbel.co.uk/play and use the promo code GRID on your 6th-month subscription. That's Babbel, babbel.co.uk/play, promo code GRID. Right, let's get back to our chat with Michael. You mentioned earlier about Korea. I just wanted to ask you about your first sort of contact with Formula One. And you did say, Korea 2010, you went to live in Korea and project manage the whole thing. How difficult was it to get that race off the ground?
Very. Honestly, I still have photos stored so as I said, I got there early June for, I think it was October race. It may as well have been an off-road course. There was nothing there. Like, I remember seeing my reports, I think it was last year even, that I look back at some old reports that I was sending to Charlie and to Jean Todt, the FIA president. The title at the bottom of the photos, approximate location of turn 1, and then approximate location of turn 16 with a big hole in the middle of it, because the two parts of it the dirt haven't even been pulled together. So,
and this is 4 or 5 months before the race is due to take place.
Yeah, it was a mountain of work to get there. We got there in the end, and then the great rain gods came down and poured upon us Sunday.
That's right. Do you remember? And it was a very late finish, wasn't it? I remember that.
It was a very late finish. It was, television does the world of wonders when it comes to lighting, but it was quite dark as well. But no, going back to my first live touch point was the 1992 Adelaide Grand Prix, where my mother actually brought me to Adelaide for the Grand Prix with a couple of family friends, and went to the event and sat at the very end of the Bravham Straight on the left-hand side in the grandstand. And that was, my first live touch point of F1, obviously having watched some of the races on television that were in a more friendly time slot worked. But at the time, the 10, 11 p.m. Sunday nights before a school day were not necessarily the thing to be done.
That trip to Adelaide in 92 with your mum, is that what triggered the interest for you, or had it started earlier than that?
I always had an interest in motorsport from a younger age. Had my ride on cars and all the rest of it as a kid, and things like that. So I had 2 of my uncles used to race at a club level event, introductory level event in Australia. So there was that interaction with the sport. But yeah, probably the sort of, let's call it the big turning point was Adelaide, and where I had my aspirations of being in Formula One. Originally, I thought that was going to be, my only pathway in was as an engineer. Very quickly worked out that physics and chemistry are certainly not for me once I started doing them at school. But then getting to chat to people and who were some initial colleagues who have now become lifelong friends, be it the Alan Gowes in the BTCC, Kelvin O'Reilly was the CEO of TOCA in Australia at the time, bouncing off them, then going on to working with the likes of the Tim Schenkens and so forth of this world. You find that there's more to the sport through the path than just working on cars in an engineering or mechanical capacity.
You had some uncles who raced a bit. Did you ever harbour ambitions to drive?
None.
Have you ever raced anything?
Raced a go-kart. So,
Okay.
So I was a number of friends of mine who I grew up with. We used to go out sort of every once a month, take our karts out to a local track, not even to race competitively because there was about 10 of us that each had a kart, but we'd effectively go to a kart track and race each other just for the fun of it and make a day of it purely for exactly that. It was our social sort of outing. But no, I really have always enjoyed the administration and everything that race control environment, the administration, the regulatory side of it is what I really, really enjoyed.
Two more things I wanted to ask you, if I may, about the journey. One is the influence of Tim Schenken. Funny that we're talking about him sat here in Austria, actually, because he finished on the podium in the 1971 Austrian Grand Prix. So chapeau to Tim, if you're listening to this. He was, the race director, still is the race director of supercars. When did you first meet him, and what have you learnt from Tim that sticks with you today?
I think my first actual interaction with Tim was, if I recall correctly, it was the 1999 Bathurst 500 Super Touring event. So there was the two 500-kilometre events, and it was atrocious weather. And he was the clerk of the course, and I was looking after one of the teams. I think that interaction was an abusive one both ways. Telling him that he had rocks in his head and so forth. But as you sort of did at that point, with challenging officialdom. But no, Tim and I really got to know each other when I started working with Tiga, which was effectively the 75% owner of supercars in 2003. And, 2004 was when I started traveling with Tim as the race director and the stewards, and I was effectively sort of the steward's secretary, assistant, let's call it, come race control assistant, and we started to, our relationship developed from there. So I was with supercars in that role and then developed into a race control assistant role through until 2008, I think it was, and then I actually got headhunted and went to CAMS to work with Tim. So, and then went along, the internal CAM system and got to know Tim much better. And then obviously working with him Singapore and then Korea in what we did there. And then obviously did Rally Australia. And after Rally Australia, I moved back to Melbourne and worked with Mark Scaife, multiple touring car champion, a good friend. And Mark was the chairman of the Supercars Commission at the time. And he twisted my arm and said, okay, well, how about you do some stuff for me and do some stuff for supercars and go back into working in your old role in race control. And yeah, Tim and I, when I first got started, he was a hard nut. Grandchildren certainly mellowed him a lot. But, he's been an immense influence in understanding the race control side of it, became more and more open as the discussion sort of went on, and that, going back to that trust and that relationship side of it of working together. And Tim still, to this day, rings on at least a weekly basis or sends a text message or an email just to see how things are going or saying well done. And, he's been a significant part of learning that race control and race operational journey. So yeah, he has had a big influence on my career.
Someone described your relationship with him as paternal to me. Is that fair? Is that how you see it?
In some ways, yes. I think we always used to joke because the age difference. I said, I'm not sure if I call you dad or grandpa, or if we really wanted to insult him, we called him great grandpa, which we won't say what the response that comes out of Tim, but you and I know exactly how his expletive reaction would be. But no, there's a huge amount of respect there both ways, and with both Tim and then Brigitte, his wife, who came to and still does attend a number of the events. When you, as I said, going back to lifestyle, when you spend 18 to 20 weekends a year, and it's not just weekends, it becomes 6-7 day weeks from the moment of arriving at the airport to the moment getting back home, there is a bond of different ways that's developed there. So,
and then when you're back in Sydney, is it true that you're like a cuckoo in that you go and base yourself in Scafey's office? Is that right?
No, in Melbourne, but yes.
In Melbourne, sorry. Yeah.
I still, so when I have been in Melbourne, Scafey has been good enough to grant me my desk back. So
it is true, you still go there now?
Yeah, absolutely. So during lockdown, thankfully it wasn't as strict in Australia as other places, but, I worked out of his office, and to the point that he said, well, might as well just leave your desk there in sort of, if you come back in December, at least you've got somewhere to be. But no, Mark and his family are great friends. They are an extended family, be it Tony's wife or his daughters. It's very much a friendship rather than, a boss type relationship.
Well, wow, Michael, it's been so wonderful to chat, and thank you so much for your time and what I know is a really, really busy week for you. Final thing from me, I've got quick fire. Favourite driver of all time?
Because he was out there, probably I would say a Villeneuve, and that's a Gilles.
Okay. Favourite car?
Favourite car? There's probably too many. To be honest, I could actually list off with you, and you're probably going to notice a bit of a theme in this, but between a Shelby Cobra, there's the older Pontoon Guard Corvette Stingray, having a look at the Ferrari 250 LM, Gullwing Mercedes, like that sort of classic era of cars. And then if I think someone's asked me before, project would be a Mini Cooper S, because I just reckon they're cool.
Hang on, that's one extreme to the other, isn't it?
Correct, it is. But no, to give you that sort of, I wouldn't put it one thing. If money wasn't an issue, I'd have a pretty cool garage.
There's no doubt about that, right? Last one, favourite circuit?
If I said in my motherland would be Bathurst. If I said so far the ones that I've seen in F1, it would be either a Spa or a Monza, and each for different reasons.
Okay, both historical tracks. That's really interesting. Good man. Well, Michael, thank you so much again for your time. It's been great to chat, and I'll see you in a couple of days in the paddock.
So, see you in a couple of days, suitably socially distanced, or via another Zoom discussion with the media. But no, thanks, Tom. It's been great chatting.
Who doesn't love a Shelby Cobra or a Mini Cooper S or Spa or Gilles Villeneuve? Clearly Michael is a man with great taste, but he's also a man with a great passion for motorsport and Formula One in particular. That enthusiasm radiates through in everything that he says, and increasingly everything that he does at the track as well. Think of his "let them race" mantra. He also has a great backstory. Anyone who attended the Korean Grand Prix 10 years ago will know what I mean when I say it was a bit different. And for Michael to live there while overseeing the final build of the Yonggam circuit must have been challenging in every sense. Michael, thanks for your time. It was great to catch up, and see you in a few days back in the Spielberg paddock. Well, that's almost it for this week, but as ever, we'll quickly dive into the virtual mailbag before we go. And last week's guest, Mika Salo, has a lot of fans. Ash Miller got in touch to say this: "Thanks for this week's cast. I hung on to every word of Mika Salo's candid and very concise recollection of his time in Formula One. Great to listen to one of my favourites from the 90s and noughties. It passes the time at work so much quicker." Well, I'm delighted to hear that, Ash. And yes, Mika is a typical Finn when it comes to conversation. And can you imagine how concise his debriefs must have been back in the day? Andy got in touch via Twitter to quote the following line from this episode. So you'd think you'd beat Eddie Irvine during the whole season? Yeah, easily, says Mika. Well, Andy, it would have been an interesting battle, wouldn't it? Irvine against Salo over a whole season. And for Mika to be as quick as Irvine in 99, after being parachuted into the team at zero notice, gives some credence to his self-belief as well. And let's end with this lovely message from Danny Hoare, who says, "Fantastic as always, Tom. Wouldn't expect anything less than brutal honesty from Mika. Just confirms to me that Toyota could have been a powerhouse with the right structure. And it makes me wonder what Mercedes would have been if Brawn and Schumacher hadn't been there at the beginning." Danny, Formula One is all about people. People working together for the greater good. And Toyota was definitely a missed opportunity both for them and for the sport. Can you imagine if they were still around today as one of the leading teams? We're running out of time, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to stop there, and I'm sorry if I didn't get to read your message out, but let me assure you that I do read them all, and I love your feedback. And if you want to drop me a message, I'm at Tom Clarkson F1 on Twitter, or you can use the hashtag F1BeyondTheGrid. Thanks for listening. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audio Boom. Until next time, keep it flat out.